The rain hammered against Marcus's windshield like bullets, each drop exploding into 1,000 smaller pieces that blurred his vision of Interstate 94. The wipers, old and worn like everything else on his 15-year-old Honda Civic, squeaked in protest with every pass. Lightning split the Michigan sky, illuminating the storm clouds that had rolled in from Lake Huron without warning. Marcus gripped the steering wheel tighter, his knuckles white against his dark skin. The digital clock on his dashboard read 11:47 p.m. in angry red numbers. He was already 2 hours late getting home from his second job at the warehouse, and Sarah would be waiting up, probably pacing the small living room of their apartment, checking her phone every few minutes. "Come on, just a little further," he muttered to himself, squinting through the rain. The exit for Roseville was only 3 miles ahead. That's when he saw the brake lights, not the steady glow of normal traffic, but the erratic pattern of someone in distress. A black luxury sedan sat on the shoulder, hazard lights blinking desperately through the downpour. As Marcus drew closer, he could make out a figure standing beside the vehicle, a woman in what looked like an expensive dress, completely soaked, waving her arms at the passing cars that sped by without slowing. Marcus's foot hovered over the gas pedal. Every instinct told him to keep driving. This wasn't his neighborhood, he didn't know this woman. And with his work uniform soaked in sweat and grease, his bank account overdrawn, and his own car barely holding together, he was hardly in a position to help anyone. But something about the desperation in her movements, the way she seemed so small against the massive storm, made him pull over. He parked behind the sedan, his hazard lights joining hers in a synchronized dance of distress. The moment he stepped out of his car, the rain attacked him like an angry mob, instantly soaking through his thin work shirt and cheap jeans. He jogged toward the woman, who had stopped waving and was now staring at him with a mixture of relief and uncertainty. Even in the storm, even with her auburn hair plastered to her head and her makeup running in dark streams down her cheeks, Marcus could tell she was beautiful, the kind of beautiful that belonged in magazines or movie screens, not stranded on the side of a Michigan highway at midnight. "Thank God," she shouted over the thunder. "I've been out here for an hour. My phone's dead and nobody's stopping." Marcus had to lean closer to hear her over the storm. She smelled like expensive perfume mixed with rain. "What's wrong with your car?" "Flat tire," she said, pointing toward the front passenger side. "I have no idea how to change it." Marcus nodded, already assessing the situation. The tire was completely shredded, probably hit some debris on the highway. The sedan, he could see now it was a BMW, maybe last year's model, sat low on its rim. "Do you have a spare?" he asked. She looked at him blankly. I don't know. Maybe." Marcus almost smiled despite the situation. Of course she didn't know. This woman probably had people who handled these kinds of problems for her. People like him. "Let me check," he said, jogging around to the trunk. She followed him, staying close. "I'm Victoria," she said, having to raise her voice again as another rumble of thunder rolled across the sky. "Marcus." He found the trunk release button and popped it open. Inside, everything was pristine and organized. The spare tire kit was there, looking like it had never been used. "You're in luck." As Marcus pulled out the jack and the spare tire, Victoria watched him with obvious amazement. "You really know what you're doing." "My dad taught me when I was 12, Marcus said, setting up the jack. "Said a man should know how to take care of his car and the people who depend on him." The rain continued its assault as Marcus worked. His fingers, already stiff from the cold warehouse air all day, grew numb as he loosened the lug nuts. Victoria tried to help by holding his phone's flashlight, but her hands were shaking so badly from the cold that the beam danced wildly. "Here," Marcus said, shrugging out of his work jacket. It wasn't much, but it was dry on the inside. "Put this on." "But you'll freeze," Victoria protested. "I'm working. You're just standing there getting soaked." He draped the jacket over her shoulders before she could argue further. As he worked to remove the flat tire, Victoria surprised him by sitting down on the wet pavement beside him, apparently unconcerned about her expensive-looking dress. "This is probably the nicest thing anyone's done for me in years," she said quietly. Marcus glanced at her, confused. "It's just a tire change." "No, it's not." Victoria's voice had changed, become softer, more vulnerable. "You don't understand. People don't usually... They don't help people like me because they want to. There's always an angle, always something they want in return." "People like you?" She gestured vaguely at herself, at the BMW, at her jewelry that caught the light from passing cars. "Wealthy people. Important people. Whatever you want to call it." Marcus focused on mounting the spare tire, processing her words. "Well, I don't want anything. Just trying to do the right thing." "Why?" The question was almost desperate. Why stop for a stranger in a storm? Marcus paused in his work, looking at her directly for the first time since he'd arrived. Her eyes were green, he noticed, and filled with something that looked like genuine curiosity mixed with pain. "Because someone should," he said simply. "Because maybe if I was stuck out here, someone would stop for me too." They fell into silence as Marcus finished the job, tightening the lug nuts and lowering the jack. The rain had finally begun to ease, though both of them were soaked through completely. "There," Marcus said, standing and wiping his hands on his already dirty jeans. "Should get you where you need to go, but you'll want to get a real tire on there tomorrow. The spare's just temporary." Victoria stood too, his jacket still draped around her shoulders. She reached for her purse, an expensive leather bag that probably cost more than Marcus made in a month. "Let me pay you," she said, pulling out her wallet. "No." The word came out sharper than Marcus intended. "I mean thank you, but I don't need anything. Please, at least let me cover your dry cleaning, or really, I'm fine." Marcus was already packing up the tools, suddenly eager to get back to his car, back to his life. The spell of the storm was breaking, and reality was settling back in. He was a warehouse worker in cheap clothes, and she was, whatever she was, someone whose world he'd glimpsed for 30 minutes but didn't belong in. Victoria watched him load everything back into her trunk. "I don't even know your last name," she said. "It's Williams." Marcus slammed the trunk shut, then immediately felt bad about his tone. "Look, I'm glad I could help. Drive safe, okay? Get that tire fixed." He started walking back toward his car, but her voice stopped him. "Marcus Williams," she called out. "I won't forget this. I won't forget you." Something in her tone made him turn around. She was standing by her car door, one hand on the handle, looking at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. "Take care of yourself, Victoria," he said. As he drove away, Marcus watched in his rearview mirror until her taillights disappeared into the night. He had no way of knowing that the woman he'd just helped was Victoria Ashford, wife of tech billionaire Richard Ashford, daughter of a federal judge, and one of the most photographed socialites in Detroit. And he had no way of knowing that this random act of kindness would change both their lives forever. The clock on his dashboard now read 12:23 a.m. as he finally pulled into his apartment complex. Sarah would definitely be worried sick, but for some reason, Marcus found himself smiling as he climbed the stairs to their second-floor apartment, Victoria's "I won't forget you" echoing in his mind. He had no idea how prophetic those words would prove to be. 3 weeks later, Marcus had almost forgotten about the woman in the storm. Almost. The memory surfaced at odd moments, when he was stocking shelves at his morning job at Peterson's Hardware, when he was loading trucks at the warehouse, when he lay in bed next to Sarah listening to her talk about her nursing school applications. Something about Victoria's eyes, the way she'd looked at him like he was the first genuine person she'd met in years, stuck with him in a way he couldn't explain. "You're distracted again," Sarah said, setting down her coffee cup with more force than necessary. They were sitting at their tiny kitchen table, the morning sun struggling through the grimy window of their Roseville apartment. "Sorry, what?" Marcus looked up from his scrambled eggs, which had gone cold while his mind wandered. "I said Mrs. Peterson asked if you could work some extra hours this week. Tommy called in sick again." Sarah's brown eyes studied his face with the intensity of someone who'd known him for 8 years. "Where do you go, Marcus? Lately, it's like you're here, but not really here." Marcus pushed the eggs around on his plate. How could he explain that helping a stranger change a tire had somehow shifted something fundamental in how he saw his life? That for 30 minutes in a storm, he'd felt like more than just a guy working 2 jobs to keep his head above water. "I'm just tired," he said. "Been pulling doubles all week." Sarah reached across the table and took his hand. Her fingers were warm and calloused from her work at the diner, a stark contrast to the soft, manicured hands that had tried to pay him that night on the highway. "I know you are. We both are." Her voice softened. "But Marcus, we're building something here. Slowly, but we're building it. I'll be done with nursing school in 18 months, and then what?" The words came out harsher than he intended. "Then you'll work at the hospital, and I'll still be loading trucks and selling hammers? Sarah, I'm 28 years old, and what do I have to show for it?" Sarah's face hardened. "You have me. You have us. That's not enough?" Before Marcus could answer, his phone buzzed on the table. Unknown number. He almost ignored it, but something made him pick up. "Is this Marcus Williams?" The voice was crisp, professional, female. "Yeah, who's asking?" "This is Jennifer Chen, personal assistant to Victoria Ashford. Mrs. Ashford would like to speak with you. Are you available to meet today?" Marcus felt the blood drain from his face. Sarah was watching him with growing concern. What's this about? Mrs. Ashford didn't specify. She simply said it was important and asked me to arrange a meeting. Would 2 p.m. at the Townsend Hotel in Birmingham work for you? The Townsend Hotel. Marcus had driven past it a few times, a place where valet parking probably cost more than he made in a day. I don't understand. How did you get this number? Mrs. Ashford has her ways of finding people. Will you be there, Mr. Williams? Marcus looked at Sarah, who was now leaning forward, clearly trying to hear the conversation. I'll be there, he heard himself say. After he hung up, Sarah crossed her arms. Who was that? Someone I helped a few weeks ago she wants to meet. She? Sarah's eyebrow arched in the way that meant trouble. What kind of help? Marcus told her about the night of the storm, though he found himself downplaying certain details, the way Victoria had looked at him, the expensive car, the obvious wealth. Even so, Sarah's expression grew increasingly skeptical. And now she's calling you 3 weeks later to meet at the Townsend Hotel. Sarah shook her head. Marcus, this sounds like trouble. Rich people don't just reach out to working guys unless they want something. Maybe she just wants to say thank you properly. At the Townsend Hotel? Sarah stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the linoleum floor. You know what? Go. Meet your mysterious rich lady. But don't come crying to me when whatever this is blows up in your face. She grabbed her purse and headed for the door. I'm going to be late for my shift. The door slammed behind her, leaving Marcus alone with his cold eggs and a growing sense that his life was about to change in ways he couldn't predict. The Townsend Hotel was everything Marcus had imagined and worse. Marble floors, crystal chandeliers, and staff who looked at his work clothes with barely concealed disdain. He felt like an imposter as he approached the concierge desk. I'm here to see Victoria Ashford, he said quietly. The concierge, a thin man with silver hair, looked him up and down before picking up a phone. After a brief whispered conversation, he gestured toward the elevators. Penthouse suite. Ms. Chen will meet you there. The elevator ride felt endless. Marcus caught a glimpse of himself in the mirrored walls, his best jeans, a button-down shirt Sarah had ironed for him that morning, work boots that he'd scrubbed clean but still showed their age. He looked exactly like what he was, a working-class guy trying to dress up for something he didn't understand. The elevator opened directly into a living room that was larger than his entire apartment. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of Detroit's skyline. The furniture looked like it belonged in a museum. Mr. Williams, a petite Asian woman in an expensive suit, approached him. I'm Jennifer Chen. Mrs. Ashford will be with you in a moment. Please have a seat. Marcus perched on the edge of a cream-colored sofa that probably cost more than his car. Everything in the room was white or cream or pale gold, creating an atmosphere of pristine wealth that made him afraid to touch anything. Marcus. He turned at the sound of his name and felt his breath catch. Victoria stood in the doorway, and she was nothing like the rain-soaked woman he'd helped on the highway. Her auburn hair was styled perfectly, falling in soft waves around her shoulders. She wore a silk blouse and tailored pants that probably cost more than Marcus made in a month. Diamond earrings caught the afternoon light streaming through the windows, but her eyes, those green eyes that had looked at him with such vulnerability in the storm, those were exactly the same. Victoria. He stood awkwardly, unsure whether to shake her hand or just nod. She solved the problem by crossing the room and taking both his hands in hers. I wasn't sure you'd come. I wasn't sure I should. She smiled, and for a moment she looked almost like the scared woman on the highway again. Jennifer, could you give us some privacy? After the assistant left, Victoria gestured for Marcus to sit back down. She took the chair across from him, close enough that he could smell her perfume, different from that night but just as expensive. I know this must seem strange, she began, calling you here after all this time. A little, yeah. I've been thinking about that night, about what you did, about how you did it. She leaned forward slightly. Marcus, do you know who my husband is? Should I? Richard Ashford, Ashford Technologies. The name hit Marcus like a physical blow. Even someone who didn't follow business news knew Richard Ashford, the tech billionaire who'd revolutionized data processing, the man whose face appeared on magazine covers and whose company employed half of Detroit's tech workforce. Jesus, Marcus breathed. Exactly. Victoria's smile was sad now. And in my world, Mr. Williams, people don't help strangers in storms just because it's the right thing to do. They help because they want something. Money, connections, influence. They help because they know who I am, but I didn't know who you were. Exactly. She stood and walked to the windows, looking out at the city below. That night, for the first time in years, I met someone who saw me as just a person, someone who needed help, Marcus joined her at the window. "Victoria, why am I here?" She turned to face him and he saw something desperate in her expression. "Because I need your help again. But this time, it's not about a flat tire." "What is it about?" Victoria took a deep breath. "It's about saving my marriage, and maybe saving myself." Outside the window, Detroit sprawled beneath them. Marcus's world of warehouses and hardware stores, of scrambled eggs and overdrawn bank accounts, looking tiny and distant from this height. He had no idea that in this moment, both their lives were balanced on the edge of a precipice, and that whatever Victoria asked of him next would send them both tumbling into something neither of them could control. If this story is touching you in some way, comment where you're watching from. Every place has its own struggles, and sometimes it's incredible to see how we all connect through such human stories. Marcus stared at Victoria, her words hanging in the air between them like smoke. "Save your marriage?" Victoria wrapped her arms around herself, a gesture that made her look smaller despite the expensive clothes and perfectly styled hair. "My husband thinks I'm having an affair." "Are you?" The question slipped out before Marcus could stop himself. Victoria's eyes flashed with something: hurt, anger, maybe both. "No." Her voice was firm. "But Richard, he's convinced otherwise. He's hired a private investigator. He's having me followed. He monitors my phone, my credit cards, everything." She turned back to the window. "Our marriage has been falling apart for years, Marcus. We barely speak anymore. When we do, it's about business or social obligations, never about us." Marcus felt like he was drowning in information he had no right to possess. "Victoria, I don't understand what this has to do with me. Richard found out about that night, about you helping me." She faced him again. "The investigator saw the credit card charge at the tire shop the next day. I went back to replace the spare with a proper tire, like you said. When Richard pressed me about it, I told him the truth, that a stranger helped me change a flat tire in the storm. And he didn't believe you." Victoria laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Richard doesn't believe in random acts of kindness. In his world, everyone has an agenda. He's convinced that you and I—" She trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. Marcus felt heat rise in his chest. "He thinks we're sleeping together. He thinks the tire story is a cover, that we met some other way, and this is how we're hiding it. That's insane." "Is it?" Victoria's voice turned sharp. "A working-class black man and a wealthy white woman. In Richard's mind, it's either an affair or you're after my money. He can't conceive of any other reason why you'd help me." The ugly truth of it hit Marcus like a slap. He thought about Sarah's suspicions, about the way the hotel staff had looked at him, about how he'd felt walking into this pristine world where he clearly didn't belong. "So what do you want from me?" he asked quietly. Victoria moved to a small bar cart in the corner and poured herself a glass of something amber. Her hands shook slightly as she lifted it to her lips. "I want you to prove him wrong. I want you to meet Richard, to show him that you're exactly what you seem to be, a good man who helped a stranger in a storm. Nothing more, nothing less." Marcus shook his head. "Victoria, that's crazy. Meeting me isn't going to change his mind. If anything, it'll make things worse. You don't understand." Victoria set down her glass and walked toward him. "Richard is looking for an excuse to divorce me. He's been looking for years. Our prenup is extensive. If he can prove infidelity, I walk away with almost nothing. So divorce him first." "On what grounds? That he's emotionally distant? That he works too much? That we haven't had a real conversation in 3 years?" Victoria's voice cracked. "Marcus, I signed that prenup when I was 25 and desperately in love. I gave up my career, my independence, everything to be his wife. If this marriage ends on his terms, I'll have nothing. No money, no home, no identity of my own." Marcus studied her face, seeing past the makeup and expensive clothes to the frightened woman underneath. "What exactly are you asking me to do?" "Come to dinner, tomorrow night, at our house in Bloomfield Hills. Meet Richard. Show him that you're a decent man who helped his wife change a tire and nothing more." "And you think that'll work?" Victoria's laugh was bitter. "Honestly, probably not. But it's the only plan I have left." Marcus walked to the window, looking down at the city below. Somewhere down there, Sarah was serving coffee to truckers and construction workers, saving every tip for nursing school. Somewhere down there was his real life. Small maybe, but honest and uncomplicated. "I can't do it," he said finally. "Please." The word came out like a prayer. "Marcus, I'll pay you whatever you want. I know you're struggling financially. I could help with your girlfriend's school or—" "Don't." Marcus turned around, anger flashing in his eyes. "Don't make this about money." "Then what? What would it take?" Marcus was quiet for a long moment. "Why me, Victoria? You could hire actors, consultants, anyone to play this part better than I could. Because it's not a part." Victoria's voice was barely above a whisper. Because that night in the storm you were real. You were the first real thing I'd encountered in years, and because," she hesitated, "because I think you understand what it's like to feel trapped." The words hit Marcus harder than he expected. He thought about his conversation with Sarah that morning, about the crushing weight of working 2 jobs just to stay afloat, about the dreams that felt more distant every day. "If I do this," he said slowly, "and it goes badly, which it will, your husband could make my life hell. A man like that has resources, connections, he could destroy me." "He could," Victoria admitted. "But Marcus, he's already destroying me. Day by day, piece by piece, I'm disappearing and I don't know how to stop it." Marcus closed his eyes, thinking about Sarah's warning that morning. She'd been right, of course. This was trouble, the kind of trouble that smart men walked away from. But when he opened his eyes and saw Victoria standing there, not the billionaire's wife, not the socialite, just a woman who was drowning in her own life, he heard himself say, "What time is dinner?" Relief flooded Victoria's face. 7 o'clock. I'll send a car for you." "No car, I'll drive myself." Marcus pulled out his phone to add the address to his contacts. "And Victoria? This is a one-time thing. After tomorrow night, we go back to being strangers." Of course, but something in her eyes suggested she didn't quite believe that any more than he did. As Marcus rode the elevator back down to the marble-floored lobby, he tried to convince himself he was doing the right thing, helping someone who needed help, just like his father had taught him. But deep in his gut, he knew he was crossing a line he might not be able to uncross. He was walking into a world where the stakes were higher than anything he'd ever encountered, where one wrong move could cost him everything he'd worked for. His phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. "Working late tonight, we'll talk when I get home." Marcus stared at the message as he walked to his car. Tomorrow night, he'd sit at a dinner table with one of the most powerful men in Detroit, pretending that his connection to Victoria Ashford was nothing more than a good Samaritan moment in a storm. What could possibly go wrong? As he drove away from the Townsend Hotel, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that he was making the biggest mistake of his life. But he also couldn't shake the image of Victoria's face when she'd said she was disappearing. Some people, he realized, were worth the risk of saving, even if it meant risking everything he had left to lose. The Ashford mansion sat behind iron gates like a fortress, its Georgian columns gleaming white against perfectly manicured grounds. Marcus's Honda looked absurdly out of place in the circular driveway, dwarfed by the limestone facade and towering oak trees that probably cost more to maintain than he made in a year. His hands were sweating as he rang the doorbell, the sound echoing through what seemed like miles of marble hallway beyond. He'd spent the entire day arguing with Sarah, who'd come home from her shift to find him ironing his one good shirt. "This is insane, Marcus," she'd said, watching him struggle with the collar. "You're walking into a trap. It's just dinner, with a billionaire who thinks you're sleeping with his wife." Sarah had grabbed his hands, forcing him to look at her. "Baby, I love that you want to help people, but this isn't changing a tire. This is playing in a league where you don't know the rules." Now, standing on Richard Ashford's doorstep, Marcus realized Sarah had been right, but it was too late to turn back. The door opened to reveal a man in his early 60s, with silver hair and calculating blue eyes. Richard Ashford was shorter than Marcus had expected, but there was an intensity about him that filled the space like electricity. His handshake was firm, measured, the grip of someone accustomed to controlling every interaction. "Mr. Williams, I'm Richard Ashford. Please come in." The foyer was a testament to wealth that didn't need to show off, understated but unmistakably expensive. Original paintings lined the walls, and a crystal chandelier cast prismatic light across marble floors that reflected like mirrors. "Victoria is in the drawing room," Richard said, leading Marcus through hallways that seemed to stretch forever. "I trust you found the house easily?" "Yes, sir." Marcus's voice sounded strange in the cavernous space. "Good. GPS these days makes everything simple, doesn't it? No more getting lost, no more unexpected detours." Richard's tone was conversational, but Marcus caught the underlying meaning. The drawing room was vast, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking gardens that looked like they belonged in a magazine. Victoria stood by the fireplace wearing a navy dress that was elegant but somehow subdued. She looked smaller in this space, diminished by the grandeur around her. "Marcus," she said, her smile tight, "I'm so glad you could make it." "Of course." Marcus accepted the glass of wine Richard offered, though his hands were shaking slightly. "Thank you for having me." Richard settled into a leather armchair that was positioned to observe both Marcus and Victoria simultaneously. "So, Mr. Williams, Victoria tells me you're quite the good Samaritan. I just try to help when I can." "Admirable." Richard's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Tell me, what do you do for work?" "I work at Peterson's Hardware in the mornings and at a warehouse in the evenings. 2 jobs, that must be challenging." Marcus felt like he was being dissected under a microscope. "It pays the bills, I'm sure." "And your girlfriend? Victoria mentioned you live with someone. What does she do?" The question felt like a trap, though Marcus couldn't figure out why. "She's studying to be a nurse, works at a diner part-time." "Nursing, noble profession." Richard sipped his wine. "Expensive education, though. Those student loans can be crippling." Before Marcus could respond, a woman in uniform appeared at the doorway. "Dinner is served." The dining room was even more intimidating than the drawing room. The table could have seated 20, but it was set for 3, making the space feel hollow and echoing. Marcus found himself seated across from Victoria, with Richard at the head of the table like a judge presiding over a trial. The first course was some kind of soup Marcus didn't recognize, served in bowls that probably cost more than his monthly rent. He ate carefully, hyper-aware of every movement, every sound. "So," Richard said, breaking the oppressive silence, "tell me about this night when you helped Victoria." Marcus glanced at Victoria, who nodded almost imperceptibly. "It was raining pretty hard. I saw her car on the side of the highway with its hazards on. She had a flat tire. And you just stopped?" "Yes, sir. Even though it was late at night in a storm and you didn't know who she was." "That's right." Richard set down his spoon with deliberate precision. "Mr. Williams, I've lived in Detroit my entire life, built my company here, employed thousands of people here. And in my experience, people don't just stop to help strangers. Not anymore, not without a reason." Marcus felt heat rise in his chest. "Maybe that says more about the people you know than the people who actually live here." The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Victoria's fork froze halfway to her mouth. "Excuse me?" Richard's voice was dangerously quiet. Marcus realized he'd crossed a line, but something about Richard's cynicism, his assumption that basic human decency was impossible, ignited something in him. "I said, maybe the problem isn't that people don't help each other. Maybe the problem is that people like you assume the worst about everyone because you can't imagine doing something just because it's right." "Marcus," Victoria said quietly, a warning in her voice. But Richard held up a hand, his eyes never leaving Marcus's face. "Go on. Your wife was stranded in a storm. She was scared and alone, and cars were driving by her like she was invisible. I stopped because that's what decent people do, because maybe if I was stuck someday, someone would stop for me too." Marcus set down his own spoon. "I didn't know who she was. I didn't want anything from her. I just saw someone who needed help." Richard was quiet for a long moment, studying Marcus like he was solving a complex equation. "And you expect me to believe that's all this is? That you have no idea who my wife is? No knowledge of my net worth, no agenda whatsoever? I expect you to believe the truth." "The truth?" Richard laughed, but it was a cold sound. "Mr. Williams, do you know what I do for a living? You run a tech company. I analyze data, patterns, human behavior, and the pattern here is crystal clear." Richard stood, his movements controlled but threatening. A working-class man meets a wealthy woman under convenient circumstances, plays the hero, establishes contact. And then what? A slow seduction? Blackmail? Or just the long game of making her feel special, understood, appreciated in ways her husband doesn't? "Richard, stop." Victoria's voice was sharp now. "No, Victoria. This charade has gone on long enough." Richard turned back to Marcus. "I know what you are, Mr. Williams. I know what you want. The question is, what's it going to cost me to make you disappear?" Marcus stood slowly, his chair scraping against the polished floor. "You're right about one thing, Mr. Ashford. I do want something." Richard's eyes gleamed with triumph. "There it is. I want you to look at your wife. Really look at her." Marcus's voice was steady now, filled with conviction. "Because while you've been so busy trying to prove I'm the enemy, you've missed the fact that she's drowning right in front of you." Marcus turned to Victoria, whose eyes were filled with tears she was fighting not to shed. "I wish I could save your marriage, Victoria, but the truth is it was already over before I ever met you. Not because of another man, but because your husband forgot how to see you as a person instead of a possession." He walked toward the door, then stopped. "For what it's worth, Mr. Ashford, your wife is one of the most genuine people I've ever met. But you'll never know that because you're too busy looking for enemies to notice the good thing you're losing." As Marcus walked through the mansion's endless hallways toward the front door, he heard Victoria call his name. He turned to see her following him. Richard, nowhere in sight. "Marcus, wait. I'm sorry it didn't work out the way you hoped." Victoria reached him just as he opened the front door. "Thank you." "For what?" "Making everything worse." "For seeing me," she said quietly. "For treating me like I matter." Marcus looked at her one last time. Beautiful, sad, trapped in a golden cage of her own making. "You do matter, Victoria. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise." As he drove away from the mansion, Marcus's phone was already buzzing with calls from Sarah. Tomorrow he'd have to explain where he'd been, what he'd done, and why he'd risked everything for a woman he barely knew. But tonight, driving through the familiar streets of his neighborhood, Marcus felt something he hadn't experienced in years: pride. Not in what he owned or what he'd achieved, but in who he'd chosen to be when it mattered most. Behind him, the Ashford mansion grew smaller in his rearview mirror. Ahead of him was his real life, complicated, uncertain, but honest. And for the first time in weeks, that felt like enough. And now that you've made it this far, tell us in the comments, where are you watching from? Your presence matters, and your story does too.